What's up, RotoViz?
Welcome.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is I'm taking it tonight, Dave. I'm taking it.
I wasn't sure. We didn't actually discuss that. So
No, we did. We totally discussed it in the Slack, man. I said I'm driving tonight, but that's okay.
All right.
I can tell it already makes you feel uncomfortable.
Yes, it does.
So welcome everybody into the RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Curtis Patrick. I'm joined by Dave Caban. We are two of the owners here at RotoViz, and we are box score scouting the 2022 wide receiver class tonight. This is going to be great. Kind of happened upon this idea as I was doing some other research in the last 24 hours or so. Before we dive in and hit our FFPC Stat Attack and cut up these receivers, Dave, how are you coming to the pod today? How was your day?
Oh, I had a pretty good day. Thank you. Doing all right. I can see, though, that you are just full of glee to be driving things tonight. I mean, this guy is a natural host. One can tell. He feels at home driving things. He's got his bourbon about to go into a glass. So, I'm doing good. You're doing good. It's actually blurred out in your camera there, so we can't see what it is.
We're gonna find it. There it is. This is Kings. I've never heard of this. This was gifted to me at Christmas. I'm a little scared to try it, Dave, but I pulled it because A, we're a couple kings, and then B, it's like the three kings that we're talking about with these elite Power 5 wide receivers tonight. But this is a single barrel select whiskey. It's a 14-year bourbon, and it's 143 proof. So do you want to hold? Do you want to maybe why don't you get into why don't you give me a quick drop while I take a sip of this, and then we'll hit our FFPC Stat Attack. Oh boy.
Oh wow.
That's some diesel.
One could say that he grimaced at that swallow there.
It actually was. It was actually. I'll leave that alone.
Yes.
Let's move on to the FFPC Stat Attack. Obviously brought to you by our partners and friends over at the FFPC, myffpc.com. They are the home of high stakes fantasy football and our official partner in all things high stakes dynasty fantasy football, home of the RotoViz Triflex Dynasty League platform. And, Dave, I was really taking a closer look at Drake London, and that's how I got the idea for this episode. And, I was just looking at how impressive his college statistics were. And so the FFPC Stat Attack tonight is Drake London, who's still just age 20. He averaged 97 yards per game over a 3-year career at USC. He had 15 touchdowns in 22 games. This guy's a round one NFL draft lock. We're going to talk about what the RotoViz Box Score Scout has to say about Drake London in a bit. But the way I want to cut this up is talk about our tier 1 Power 5 wide receivers. Get to know them a little bit, talk to them, about them to the listeners. We've got Treylon Burks, Drake London, and Garrett Wilson we want to focus on in this episode. If that doesn't get you excited, I don't know what will. And then we've got a mystery group of 5 receiver that we want to talk about at the end of the episode. The way this is going to work, Dave, I'm going to pull the receiver. I'm going to give you some of the important peripherals on the receiver, share some of the stats from our RotoViz prospect databases, talk to you a little bit about where the mock drafts have these players going. Then I want you to chime in with the API. Travis May and Blair Andrews created this great metric that we're getting to know more about. And I think this is year 3 of us using it, called Adjusted Production Index. And it gives percentile production scores to all prospects. We're going to review that score just briefly and then go over our RotoViz consensus rank on the player. Then we're going to unveil the Sims from the Box Score Scout. And we'll just see what we have to say about the players. So does it sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right, well, let's start with the monster, Treylon Burks. Treylon Burks, if you didn't follow college football and this is your first exposure to the class, this is the closest thing to Megatron that we've seen in a bit. Not necessarily his entire profile, but just physically, This guy is imposing, man. He's 6'3", 2.25. He's probably going to challenge 4.5 or sub 4.5 in the 40. Dominated SEC competition. Had a role as a freshman at Arkansas. Caught 29 balls for 475 yards, but really that breakout occurred in 2020. He had 51 receptions for 820 yards and 7 touchdowns. That's a 42% dominator rating as a sophomore. And then, he just continued his dominance, actually improved upon it slightly and played more games, obviously. So the counting stats racked up 67 catches, 1,123 yards receiving in 2021, Dave, with 11 touchdowns, and repeated his 40+% dominator rating with a 46 as a junior. So he's got a very impressive profile. He's imposing physically. He's not just a big, a big contested catch guy. Like, he can run. He can run you over. He can run around you. He can accelerate. Very, very exciting prospect, even to the film analyst. This isn't just a box score scouting exercise here. So, Dave, we've got Treylon basically as a consensus, number one receiver in the guide. No?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's a player that's easy to be excited about for a number of the reasons that you said. I think when you get to see one of these big, imposing wide receivers show up, that's always exciting. But as you kind of alluded to, there's a little bit of a difference this year than with some of these other players where perhaps you looked at the size and how that would translate, and you weren't certain if it was going to be entirely well-rounded. Right, Treylon Burks, a lot to be excited about. As you said, we are very, very high on him. And then the adjusted production index, right? His percentile in it is 94.2.
Oh boy.
Which is, just super impressive, and probably helps to signal, as we've talked about with the way, and some of the things we're learning about API, he should have a pretty darn good draft stock, come draft time. So we are very excited about Treylon Burks. If you want to have some fun, go look at some highlights too, because I'm pretty sure that you're going to find some too. They're just going to get you salivating at the prospect of potentially adding him onto your dynasty rosters.
Oh, if you're a highlight scout, Treylon Burks is he's basically prospect porn. Okay. So let's transition. Let's talk about, what the NFL community is thinking about Treylon Burks, because that's important. We want to do all of the production and athletic measurable based scouting that we can do, because we have a lot of research that tells us which one of these guys, which prospects should hit based off of those profiles, or most likely to hit, or in some cases, least likely to not be a hit. But the NFL draft position is obviously so important to pretty much any model you'll find at RotoViz or anywhere else. And I'm actually pulled up NFL mock draft database.com. This is a pretty cool site for any of you that want to do any of your own research. They actually kind of collect all of the big industry mock drafts from popular draft analysis websites and kind of track ADP, just like we would from fantasy rookie drafts. And right now, Treylon Burks is trending as the 18th pick in the first round. So what's really cool, where we can transition that to, is our RotoViz Box Score Scout. The RotoViz Box Score Scout takes the production metrics that we were just talking about, some of the raw measurables, and projected draft position, and then gives you a list of sims for the player. And it is interesting that Treylon Burks' sims are a little underwhelming, Dave. They're a little underwhelming for a player that we're talking about, consensus first round pick, has 2 seasons of 40+% dominator rating, his API in the 90th percentile, just absolute beast. But I don't think you're going to like these sims, man. He's a 95% match to Kenny Britt, 82% match to Jonathan Baldwin, 76% match to N'Keal Harry. So those are the top 3. Those are the top 3. I don't think this is going to get like oohs and ahs from the crowd. I see we've got some live stream audience following along here. This is a little gross. This is not what I expected to see for Treylon. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so I actually have a couple of thoughts here. I think that it's important to recognize sometimes what the tool is actually doing. And what I take away from this is that it's telling us he has a pretty good all-around profile. It just so happens that the top 5 or so players that he matches with went on to not have the type of careers that we would have liked. You know, Kenny Britt always felt like he was one game, one season, one team movement away, never really happened. And Keel Harry, a lot of people arguably had him as their number 1 in that class versus AJ Brown.
Guilty.
Right? Jonathan Baldwin.
I was one of those guys. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the other players that you listed, I know you're pulling up now. I don't remember everybody that you said there, but my key takeaway was that those players have pretty strong profiles. And another thing that we have to think about here is, as you said, very, very precocious player, which I think that counts for something. So though these guys didn't hit that much, I actually think that's a pretty good reflection on what he was able to achieve in his 3-year career at Arkansas. So, you know, when we get to layer in things like where other players that might pop in some of the sims from athletic measurables, when I get to run some of these guys through, the new class through regression trees and whatnot, we'll have other points where you're hitting with other players that can seem very appealing, because I can think of a handful of other players that you very easily could have pull up in that production profile that we would have felt a lot better about. So,
let's go a little deeper. To your point,
okay.
Dave. Let's go a little deeper. So the top 3 we didn't like. It's Britt, Baldwin, and Harry. But then you start to see some signs of life. And these are still pretty decent matches, over 50% matches, actually in the mid 60s. So his number 4 match is DJ Moore, 69th percentile.
Yep.
Jordy Nelson at 65th. And then Hakeem Nicks at 63. Now, Nicks's career got derailed by injury, but all 3 of those players were, they were massive hits.
Yeah.
So, you would like to see those 3 guys at the top and not have to scroll down a little bit. But, it's not all, rain clouds for Treylon Burks' Sims. And then there's other tools too, is the last part I would really want to add here.
Yep.
Treylon Burks is going to be an absolute like freak score megastar, right? Once we run him through that, once we have the official 40 times. So there are other things that we can do. We want to use all of these different models together to limit our chances to whiff. It's very easy to see why Treylon Burks is many people's, many analysts, wide receiver 1 in this class. He is our wide receiver 1 at this time, and part of a multiplayer tier 1, have you, and we're going to review those other players now. But yeah, Treylon, it's a mixed bag of sims. We've got 2 other players at better sims. So let's transition there. We're going to go.
Can I just say one thing though?
Sure.
When you're getting like the percentages and you're looking at these and kind of ranking out the players, I also think that we need to remember that though, like there is a science behind this, just because you see one player coming in at a 94 and another coming in at 65, that doesn't mean that he is so much more like the top player versus the other player, that you should throw away all of the other results. Final thing, just on interpreting those results.
Yeah, I think that's important. That's a good clarification, Dave. That's why it's a 2-man show. That's
Yes.
why it's a 2-man show. I want to transition to Drake London. Drake was the subject of our FFPC Stat Attack at the top of the show. And Drake, man, this is a different guy. So he's 6'5", 210. Not going to have the speed or really probably any of the athletic measurables other than maybe finishing well in the vert as compared to Treylon. He's going to run a 4.6 plus in the 40 if he even runs the 40. I'm going to guess he doesn't even run it. So let's think of like a Keenan Allen-esque speed profile here, okay? But he's a baby, man. Drake London is still in diapers. He's 20 years old. He doesn't even turn 21, Dave, until July 24th. So he's going to play his entire rookie season at age 21. We love players with those profiles here at RotoViz. Love them. So, he's got the early breakout, even though it was as a junior, because he's just so darn young. Let's talk about his journey at USC. Major role as a freshman, 39 receptions, 567 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns. Just missed actually that 20% dominator rating as a freshman. And, we've transitioned to using 30 plus. But 20 is still very valid. If you don't want to, exclude people and players in your sample, he just missed that original 20 that we used to use and other sites still use. Then you go to a sophomore year, only played 6 games, in 2020. Obviously, it was a weird season. 33 receptions, 502 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns. Did break 20% with a 22% dominator. And then, this past season only played 8 games, but was just truly sensational. I mean, he was probably on pace for 1,600, 1,700 yards this year, Dave. Just absolutely tearing it up. 88 receptions, 1,084 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns in just 8 games. Massive 42% dominator rating in that USC offense. So just really exciting statistical profile here. What do we have about him in the guide before we talk about his projected draft position?
Yeah, so Drake London, API percentile, 77.9. That is pretty strong, ranks up there, in the top 4 that we have in the class this year. Then if we pivot to the actual rankings in the guide, London was a player that just kept creeping up as we were talking about him, right? Blair started getting jazzed up. Travis gave us the rundown on him. We started talking about the age. Next thing we knew, Drake was just climbing up, got his way into our top 3 as our second most highly ranked wide receiver. Before you start talking about where he's going to go in the draft, one other thing that I want to note here is the profile. I can't say with any certainty, but I am pretty sure that when I run this through the regression trees, which have been very helpful things in the past for looking at where a player might go in the draft and also how they might do, that looks like a profile that should really, really smash. So I'm super excited about Drake London. Just feels like the more we start talking about him, the more the enthusiasm grows.
Yeah, for sure. I've got Treylon pulled up. There's Drake. So Drake's projected draft position again at the NFL mock draft database here, pulling from all of the industry mocks that have been going on. Projected draft position of 19 overall. What's really cool, if you actually scroll down in their tools, you can actually see where different analysts have the player going. And so he looks like a frequent landing spot with one of those mid to late teens picks by the Eagles. And then we also see if he slides Green Bay or Las Vegas being an option. And then Harris Oates, has him all the way up in his top 10. So you just never know with a player like this and how much analytics plays into an NFL front office's, evaluation of a player. But anyone that factors age in is going to love Drake London. You got more time to develop him, more contracts that he could potentially have, during his career. But his sims, Dave, oh my goodness. I don't know that I've ever seen a top 4 sim from our tool that I liked more than I like Drake London's. It's crazy, man. Okay, so again, 6'5", 210 pounds. We're assuming a 4.6 40 here. The top 4 matches: DeAndre Hopkins, CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Ayuk, and Michael Thomas. Oh my goodness.
Oh my God, sir.
Yeah, that is nuts. And what's cool too is, DeAndre Hopkins was a similarly young player. I mean, he was one of the youngest high draft picks in NFL history. And so that's what's really exciting, because Hopkins isn't, I mean, he's athletic on the field and that he can make plays, but there are some athletic similarities here. Like DeAndre Hopkins is not, the burn up the grass, jump out of the screen type player. He knows how to position himself for the ball. But he's not somebody that was just a combine wrecker. And that's certainly not what Drake London's going to be either. And so I find that sim in particular really exciting. London was already my wide receiver too. This exercise definitely validates that, because, he did have, a similar peak dominator to Treylon, did it at a younger age, and these sims are just fantastic. Now, if you go down toward the bottom of his top 10, it looks a little bit more like the top of Treylon Burks' top 10. So we get into Ruben Randall, Laviska Shenault, Laquan Treadwell, Kendall Wright, N'Keal Harry, Jonathan Baldwin. So it's just that those top sims, those closest sims, maybe a little bit tighter there with Drake. So anything else to add before we get on to the next guy?
Other than just how ridiculous that is. I mean, when Brandon Ayuk is looking like your floor based on those top 4, it's hard not to get super excited, right? So some heavy hitters in that group. Gotta love it.
Yeah, this Kings is a heavy hitter. I forgot.
Yes,
I was grabbing the bourbon like it was what I normally pour. Oh my goodness! And I forgot that it was this 143 proof monster.
Wow.
That's gonna take a second. So one more elite Power 5 guy that I want to get to tonight. Player I got to watch every snap of because he played right here in Columbus, Ohio. Hometown favorite, elite high school recruit, freshman producer, none other than Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson's a different animal than Treylon Burks and Drake London. You know, those guys are imposing figures, are going to win, those one-on-one matchups just with their physicality. Garrett Wilson is more of your classic, last 3 to 5 years type alpha receiver. He's just at 6 foot, might not even quite measure 6 foot at the combine. 192 to 195 pounds. He'll probably run a sub 4.5 40, mid 4.4s, low 4.4s, probably is max out. He will be an age 22 rookie. He turns 22 this July. Draft age of 21, final college year of played at age 21. When I look at our RotoViz statistical database here, he played 13 games as a rookie, appeared in all 13. 30 receptions, 432 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. Then we start to see that progression in year 2. So in the crazy, coronavirus affected 2020 season, Ohio State played just 8 games. He did catch 43 passes for 723 yards, 6 touchdowns, and a 31% dominator. And then, 2021 is really interesting because, and we'll talk about one of the other players, later in Chris Olave. But then he also had the breakout of Jackson Smith and Najiba. And so the Buckeyes offense, those receivers, it's almost like, it's exactly the same as what we have to think about the Alabama offensive skill players in that context, that these players kind of hold each other down. Like, you can only be so good when you're playing with all other, high-end 4-star and 5-star, players. It's really hard to hold, like, Garrett Wilson capping out at a 31% dominator rating. It's hard to look at that negatively as compared to London or Burks being in the 40s, given, the other players on their team. And so there are some other sites that attempt to adjust for this. I kind of just like to do it situationally and commonsensically. I know there are some sites trying to assign some sort of metric to that. And, so you can find that information. I'm sure if you follow RotoViz, you know where those sites are. But Dave, let's run down Wilson in the guide. And I think actually you were, as we get into that, I think you had Wilson above London. I think he's like your flag plant guy, right?
Yeah, I was a huge fan of Wilson. And there's a number of reasons for that. Now, I can't guarantee that I don't end up with London jumping over him, but I do think that when you really dig into the profile, you add the context like you mentioned, it's hard not to really like him. Now, from an API perspective, you have Wilson coming in with an API percentile of 67, which puts him a little bit lower in the class behind a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson out of Kentucky, who I'm looking forward to talking about at some point.
Oh, yeah. That'll be fun. That'll be fun.
Also far ahead of his Ohio State teammate. But as a result of my good feelings about him and everybody else's too, he's coming in just behind London. So just one running back ahead of him, the 2 wide receivers. Definitely a different type of animal than these other wide receivers that we've talked about. So it's going to be interesting to see what the NFL does with him. So what are we seeing right now as far as he's projected? Is he a first rounder? Is he projected to go ahead of some of the other players we mentioned?
Oh, yeah. And I didn't need the NFL mock draft database to tell me this, but it's interesting that as they look around the community, that's what they're finding. Garrett Wilson is a lock top 15 draft pick and probably has a good chance of going in the top 10, maybe even the top receiver overall. He would probably be the odds-on favorite if I was going to lay a bet on that. This database has him at 11th overall. Right now, which would place him, wide receiver 1, according to what they're tracking. And so, he would actually be drafted before the other players we've talked about if this were to play out. So when I put in, this information into the RotoViz Box Score Scout, so we give him 6 foot height, 192 pound weight, 4.45 in the 40, with a draft position of 11 overall. Again, this may be overall the best balanced sim profile of the three that we've talked about. The closest matches at the top, maybe not quite as elite as what we saw from London, but there's more quality throughout the top 10. And, that feels pretty good in terms of a range of outcomes for a player. So Garrett Wilson, actually a 100% sim score match to Jerry Jeudy. That's really interesting. You don't see that 100 pop very often.
No, you don't.
But we're seeing it pop here. We've got CeeDee Lamb, Nelson Aguilar, Percy Harvin. I'm going to go down the list because it's all pretty good stuff. Odell Beckham Jr., Justin Jefferson, Corey Coleman, Jeremy Maclin, Jalen Reagor, and Calvin Ridley. I mean, that's a very, very solid list. All of these guys were stellar prospects. It didn't pan out for a couple of them. Corey Coleman had a pretty tumultuous time. Jalen Reagor has looked, like a total flop, unfortunately. Probably the worst beat of the group here. And then Nelson Aguilar, he's had his moments. He was at least fantasy relevant. So, I kind of choose to look at it as, if you get a whiff on Wilson, it's probably that Aguilar profile, but there's lots of other ways that he can win here. So I really like this group. Anything stick out to you here amongst these sims?
I guess just that even the players in this group that kind of flamed out still had a number of chances in the NFL. We saw, different teams kick the tires on them, try to get things going for them. Aguilar, there was the season where, he was kind of his team's main option in its passing game. So if these are the type of knocks that you can find on him coming out of the box score scout, that you're dealing with a very, very solid prospect. So I'm just very jazzed up on Wilson.
Did we hit his API? I'm not sure we hit his API. I think we
did 67th percentile.
60. Okay, so that's Travis really likes to see 60th percentile and above.
Yeah,
that's what we're looking for with a player that is probably going to be a wide receiver 2 at some point, provided they're a day 1 or 2 draft pick. Wilson is checking all of those boxes, so we can feel pretty good about it. API again, not reaching those elite levels because Travis's model takes mostly into account peak scores. And, London and Burks, hitting those, 40th percentile plus or 40% plus dominator scores as compared to, where we saw Wilson land because of his, teammates. That's I think important and material here. Now,
and so it's interesting that you see, was Jeudy in that group?
Yes. Jeudy was actually Wilson's closest sim.
Exactly. Yeah. And they had a similar situation. Now, I know people might not be too excited with what we've seen from Jeudy thus far, but he has shown, the guy can definitely play, in the NFL, as I think the rest of the guys that he was playing with have shown. So, just another layer here.
So we're going to move to the group of 5. And, we kind of titled this episode, box score scouting, the elite power 5s. And, we have a tier break here. And there's some other players that are really good. Jameson Williams, I'm sure some of you are scratching your heads. Why aren't you talking about him? Okay, well, I think it's pretty fair to put him a half notch below these other guys when we're talking about coming off of an ACL. It has to matter. Even with modern medicine, modern physical rehab, you hope that he's going to have a full recovery. Will it affect his draft position? Many seem to think not. That he'll still be a top half of the first round type player. He could be the wide receiver 2 off the board after Garrett Wilson, actually. But it has to matter. It has to matter. And, he came on the scene a little bit later than these other guys as well. Transfer situation, couldn't cut through the situation in Ohio State, was able to cut through at Alabama, interestingly, and kind of get that big share of the offense down there. But we want to highlight a group of 5 player. This is really exciting. We're going to find out how this player compares to his peers live. We haven't looked at this sim group yet, but this guy's a swag bag of fun. Dave, Skye Moore from Western Michigan, man.
First of all, the name is just a lot of fun. This might be one of my favorite names since Little Jordan Humphrey, right? So, if this doesn't get you excited, I don't know what does.
I forgot about Little Jordan, man.
Somewhere resurgence this year. We got to see him, get some action down there in New Orleans in some games.
Yeah, somewhere Russell Clay is smiling. He's always been a prospect name lover. But so Skye Moore, super super productive guy as a true freshman at Western Michigan. Obviously he's not playing the same type of competition as these other guys, but if you use the 20% dominator rating as your breakout, he broke out as a true freshman. Played all 13 games, 51 receptions, 802 yards, three touchdown receptions. Continued to break out even further as a sophomore. Western Michigan only played 5 games because of the situation with the pandemic. 24 receptions, 389 receiving, 3 touchdowns, improved to a 26% dominator. And then his junior season, it's just a whopper, man. 95 receptions, 1,288 receiving yards, 10 touchdowns, and yet another player cresting that 40% number, Dave, 43% dominator for Skye Moore there. So what do we have on him in the guide? He was a favorite. I remember from our mock drafts, he was a favorite kind of target. We were all stealing him from each other at the end of like the 3rd round, maybe even the middle of the 3rd round. Where does he show up in our actual consensus rankings, and what's his API look like?
Right. So consensus rankings, we have him down with an ADP from the group of around 32. Most everybody has him ranked, or we had him going between 29 and 33. So he's coming in. Hold on. Let me quickly count this up on a position basis. Coming around the wide receiver 13, I believe it is. And hold on. I actually did not grab the big conference guys. All right, here we go. Skye Moore, 88.2 percentile API, the highest of the non-Power 5 conference players. So that is definitely an impressive score to see for him. Of the non-Power 5 guys, we only have 4 going well above the 60th percentile.
So let's find out live what the RotoViz Box Score Scout says about Skye Moore. You saw there that I flashed the NFL mock draft database information. He's coming in at prospect 119. So that would put him in the late 4th round. So early day 3. And this is an interesting list. You've got some names that you would want to see here. In particular, Stephon Diggs and Antonio Brown showing up on this list. You're not going to see a lot of hits from small schools who are drafted, on day 3. The fact that we get any returns here is super exciting, and the fact that it's Diggs and Antonio Brown is really exciting. So I think this validates his production. If he hits this type of draft capital, I think we can feel pretty good about him being, a favorite sleeper, high upside flyer pick. This is the type of player I would be super excited to trade up to the early 3rd round in my rookie draft and select. That's kind of how I would approach Skye Moore, at least at this point, unless he somehow goes on day 2, Dave.
Yeah, well, even seeing guys in there like Tajay Sharp, Josh Reynolds, maybe even to some level like Jared Abbrederis. To me, those are actually pretty encouraging signs for one of these types of players going, late that people could overlook.
The Kings just hit again, man. I keep forgetting. You're supposed to remind me that I'm drinking this fire breather tonight, man. Every time it's knocking me back.
Oh my Lord.
But I agree. I mean, not all rookie picks are created equal. And we're not going to have very many hits or I mean, maybe perhaps we should define hits in the 3rd and 4th round of rookie drafts differently. I mean, if you ever flex that player at all in his career, that's a pretty big win for a 3rd round rookie pick. If the player gets a 2nd NFL contract, that's a huge hit as a day 3 NFL player. And we do see multiple players on the list like that. Even Ruben Randall, as inefficient as he was, I mean, many people were starting him. I think it was his 2nd or 3rd year. Highly usable back during the Eli Manning era there in New York. So really like this list for Skye Moore. I will only be choosing to remember Stephon Diggs and Antonio Brown as a Sims from this exercise because that's how I'm going to do it, because that's how I want to do it. But I hope everyone really enjoyed this format. We're going to do this on Tuesdays for the next couple of weeks, kind of just get through the meat of the important receivers. So we'll get into Jameson Williams, Chris Olave, a couple of names that come to mind for our next episode, but we'll pull another Power 5 player or two. And then I want to get into Jalen Tolbert for our next group of 5 player, Dave. I was really torn between him and Skye Moore for tonight, but we went with the swaggy name for sure. So anything else to add before we sign off here?
No, but there is one other player from the non-Power 5 group that I was a pretty big fan of in those mock drafts we were doing. I'm not going to say who it is, though, so that I can share my excitement when his time comes.
Yeah, you can come back on our Tuesday live streams to figure out who that is or listen. Of course, we post this on the podcast channel on Wednesday mornings. But yeah, this is what our Tuesday night looks like for the next month or so, Dave.
Thank you for